Okay, let's dive in. We're unpacking source material that you've shared with us. It's basically a video analysis and a transcript.
Right, focusing on some recent speeches by a major political figure, Lula, as he's referred to in the source.
And this analysis comes from an online streamer, Conectado, who's got a pretty sharp, critical take on things.
Yeah, definitely critical. That's sort of the filter here.
So our mission, really, is to sift through this look at what Lula actually said in the speeches.
And then see how Conectado responds, his critiques, his counter-arguments.
Exactly. Kind of understand this online commentary space and how political rhetoric gets, well, dissected.
Yeah, it's interesting because you get the statement and then, boom, almost immediately, the pushback online. Often pretty forceful pushback.
For sure. And you see Conectado's style right away. Highly critical. Lots of sarcasm.
Oh, yeah, it doesn't hold back. Uses labels like enchanter of mules, I think.
Yeah, and sarcastically calls Lula the most honest soul.
Right. That's his framing. And the core accusation running through it all is that, well, the political figure is lying or twisting facts. That's the lens.
Okay, so let's get into some specific examples. There was that bit about the San Francisco River project.
Yeah, the historical claim. Lula mentions Dom Pedro II having the idea way back in 1846, like 179 years ago.
A long time ago. But then he links it to something else, right?
He does. He sort of follows it up with this idea that God specifically left that region, the Sertan, without water.
Okay.
Because God knew that he, Lula, would eventually become president and be the one to bring the water.
Wow. Okay. So history mixed with a bit of divine purpose. How did the streamer react to that?
Predictably, maybe. Immediate skepticism. Jumps right on it. Accuses him of lying about reading right from the start. Questions the history, sure, but really mocks the divine angle. Like sarcastically asking if he met God at a spiritual center or something.
Right. Poking fun at how audacious it sounds.
Exactly. And the streamer brings in, sarcasm, even mentioning Lucifer as a counterpoint to the God claim.
So he sees it as arrogant or maybe manipulative.
Yeah, I think he frames it as reflecting a lack of, real substance, governing by feelings, as he puts it, not the head. Just self-aggrandizing narrative.
Okay, so that's history and divinity. What about something more down to earth, like income tax?
Right. Lula makes this statement about income tax. Says if Congress approves, people earning above $5,000 won't pay anymore.
And he frames this as helping the most needy.
Yes. And this is where Conectado brings out a direct factual challenge. He says, hang on, the proposal isn't above $5,000, it's up to $5,000.
That's a pretty significant difference in who benefits.
It really is. And the streamer also points out that the urgency classification was removed from the bill, suggesting, maybe it won't even happen soon or at all.
Okay.
But beyond the technical detail, he really hammers the most needy claim. He argues, look, people earning $5,000 aren't the poorest folks.
Right. They might not be paying much income tax anyway at that level, or maybe none.
Exactly. So his rhetorical question, what does the poor have to do with this? And that's sarcastic. Oh, thank you, Lord.
Yeah.
It's all meant to show that Lula's misrepresenting who this policy actually targets.
Makes sense. So following from that, there's the economic argument Lula makes. Putting money in poorer people's hands turns them into consumers, right? Boosts the economy.
The classic Keynesian idea. They spend it at the local bakery, the shop, demand goes up, economy grows. That's the argument presented.
And the streamer's take.
Much more cynical. He looks at, the high price of eggs mentioned in the source material and basically says, hold on, with prices like this, poor people aren't stimulating diverse sectors. They're just trying to afford basics, like meat.
So questioning the whole grand vision.
Totally. He's implying it's disconnected from reality.
Yeah.
Sarcastically saying, yeah, this kind of thinking is why Brazil is doing so marvelously. It's a direct jab.
Pitting the theory against perceived reality.
Precisely. Macro versus micro, in a way.
Okay, now, a big chunk of the source deals with critiques of the previous government. Lula makes a lot of accusations.
Oh, yeah, it's extensive. Spending 4 years lying on television, fake news, the whole COVID pandemic handling.
Right. He throws out that 700,000 deaths figure, claims half might have been avoidable.
Yeah, and also paralyzed public projects mentions, 87,000 housing units, thousands of daycares?
And even challenges the audience, like name one thing the last guy did in these states.
Standard political playbook, right?
Yeah.
Contrast yourself with your predecessor's alleged failures. But Conectado jumps all over this, calls it hypocrisy, fallacia, logical fallacies, deceptive arguments.
And he uses that label.
Pinocchio.
Yeah, pretty blunt.
Very direct. Does he challenge the specifics?
He does. He questions the COVID numbers. The 50% avoidable claim sarcastically says Lula can't even do the math. He dismisses the audience challenge as kind of pointless, given who's likely at these rallies.
Right, preaching to the choir, basically, pretty much. And interestingly, on that San Francisco project, Conectado actually suggests the previous government finished it.
Oh, so a direct contradiction to Lula's narrative about bringing water after 179 years.
Exactly. It's a specific counter-narrative. He sees all these attacks as projection, propaganda aimed at what he calls a low IQ audience. And he makes that point about it being funded with public money, our money, as he puts it.
Gotcha. There was also a quick mention of investing more in culture, cinema, theater?
Yeah, that came up. The streamer's reaction was pretty brief, quite cynical. He mentions Lei Rouanet.
Which is that controversial cultural funding law in Brazil, right?
Exactly. So by just dropping that name sarcastically,
he's signaling his disapproval, questioning if culture is the right priority, maybe hinting at past controversies associated with the law.
Okay. And one last point on government actions, the aid to Rio Grande do Sul after the floods. Lula claims unprecedented resources were sent.
And Conectado's response is stark. Just calls it a lie, flat out. Says the state is still struggling, the money hasn't arrived, and won't arrive.
Yeah, he claims it won't because, in his view, the country is broke. It's a very bleak assessment of the government's follow-through.
So beyond the speeches themselves, the source material gets into other allegations too, right? About the rallies, business ties.
Yes, exactly. The streamer talks about this idea that people attending Lula's events aren't always genuine local supporters.
Oh, so?
He alleges they're often brought in paid. Uses terms like carreatas, like bus convoys, mentions payments of $50, that pão com mortadela phrase.
Which is sort of shorthand for basic food provided at rallies, sometimes seen as attracting attendees.
Right. It implies people are there for the payment or the free food,
Yeah.
not necessarily ideological commitment.
And the source includes some specific testimony on this.
It does. From a councilman, Victor Nascimento, about an event in Itajaí. He describes seeing low turnout from locals.
Despite calls for people to show up.
Yeah. But then seeing lots of buses from other towns arriving. He claims attendees told him they were paid, and he contrasts this with locals being, at work.
So presented as evidence for the streamer's claim about rent-a-crowds, essentially.
That's how it's framed in the source, yeah. Concrete support for that allegation.
Okay, then switching gears quite a bit, there's this warning about BYD, the Chinese car company.
Yeah, this is Conectado raising concerns about BYD, which has links to the current government. He flags several things.
Like what?
Well, the company's ties to the Chinese state, described as the communist government, then alleged delays in building a factory they promised in Brazil.
Okay.
And also reports of mistreating workers, both apparently imported Chinese workers and local subcontractors who were allegedly unpaid and on strike.
That sounds serious, the labor issues.
It does. And he connects this to potential risks for consumers. He suggests the company might be unstable in Brazil, maybe pulling out if Lula loses power, which could leave car owners high and dry.
Any other consumer issues mentioned?
Yeah, he mentions reports of long waits for spare parts for BYD cars already on the road.
So the streamer's argument is basically, if they treat workers badly, they might treat customers badly too.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
He's warning potential buyers, linking the alleged corporate behavior and political ties to potential problems for anyone who buys their cars. Factory delays, parts issues, worker strikes it, paints a picture of potential instability.
Right. So wrapping it all up, how does the streamer summarize his view of Lula's communication style?
He calls it roso, which means like shallow or superficial.
Okay.
Sees it as tailored for a specific audience and keeps hitting that theme of publicly funded propaganda.
Well, this has certainly given us a detailed look at one specific instance of political speech meeting sharp online critique. The claims, the counterclaims, the sarcasm, the specific allegations.
Yeah, it really shows that dynamic, how messages are put out there and then immediately picked apart, challenged, sometimes fact-checked, sometimes just attacked in this digital space.
It definitely highlights how complex it can be to navigate all this information. Which brings us to, I guess, a final thought for you listening. In this environment, where you have official statements instantly met with intense online commentary, competing narratives, critiques like Conectado's. How do you personally sift through it all? How do you decide what feels credible, what seems important when you're faced with these conflicting views?